Good morning. How we doing today? Good. Today, the word that we're going to talk about is one that's probably a little bit more familiar to you. Words like justification and regeneration, we don't really throw those words around a lot in everyday conversation. But this one's probably a bit more recognizable. The word we're talking about today is reconciliation. And even the definition, you probably get at its most basic level. Reconciliation means the act of bringing two parties who are opposed to each other or who are separated from each other and bringing them together. It's to bring peace between those two parties. But the biblical picture of what reconciliation is, it's a little bit deeper and a little bit richer even than that. One of my favorite authors is this guy by the name of Andrew Wilson, and Wilson says that in the Bible there are basically two different kinds of reconciliation, and they're interconnected. In fact, you can't have the second kind of reconciliation without having the first, he says. So what are those kinds of reconciliation? Well, the first one is one we've already talked about, and that is having peace with God. We talked about this yesterday, that even though we were God's enemies, even though we were opposed to Him, He made a way through Christ for us to be counted as righteous. He justifies us and then brings Him to Himself, or brings us to Himself so that we are reconciled back to Him. We have peace with Him. The second kind of reconciliation is in this nature, and that is that we are having peace with others around us. And as I said, we cannot fully have this kind of reconciliation without first having this kind of reconciliation. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, I don't know if that's true. Hang on there for just a second, Drew. I mean, people have that kind of peace all the time, even if they don't know God. You can have two nations who are at war with one another, who are fighting with each other, and they agree to come together and have a ceasefire, and they sign a peace treaty, and now they're at peace. Or you can have two friends who are in conflict with one another, and they agree to set aside their differences and come back together and get along and be friends again. And that's true. That kind of stuff happens, but that's not the kind of peace I'm talking about. The kind of peace I'm talking about is biblical peace. And it's not just the absence of conflict. The Hebrew word is shalom, and it means wholeness, completeness, things as they should be, life as it should be. That's what we're talking about. You see, you can get two nations to stop fighting, to stop having war between them, but that doesn't mean that you've got the two people to stop hating each other within those nations. Now, you can get some friends to start getting along again, but what I'm talking about is bigger than that. Remember, the model for this kind of reconciliation is the kind of reconciliation that God provided for us. And when God reconciled you, He did not just forgive you and just say, hey, it's okay. All right, I'm not gonna hold it against you. We're not going to sit here and be at odds with one another. We're cool now. All right, we're good. You do your thing, I'll do my thing. Let's let bygones be bygones. That's not what God did when He reconciled you. No. What God did is He came and He sat down and He said, come here. He invites you in and says, come sit with me. I want to know you. I want you to know me. And what God does is He makes a way for wholeness. He makes a way for those who were His greatest enemies to be called His greatest treasure, to be His beloved, to be His friends. And this is the kind of reconciliation that we're called to live out. It's a kind of reconciliation that would take two different people who in any other situation have no business getting along, no business being friends. The kind of people who so many people would never even expect because of their race or because of their background or because of their politics. Everyone would just expect them to either be at odds or at the very best to maybe kind of have like a mutual respect, but to kind of run in different circles. Like we're cool, but that's kind of it. It's a kind of reconciliation that takes those two people and brings them together and makes them one and makes them family. Makes them thicker than blood. And when that happens, especially on like a large scale, when you have people coming together from very different backgrounds and very different places, coming together as family, that's a kind of reconciliation that the world just can't pull off. Our divided, fractured world that we live in today, it doesn't even know what to do with something like that. And when we live that way as Christians, that is a very powerful witness to the world around us. Jesus said it himself in John 13:35. By this will they know that you are my disciples, that you belong to me, by the way that you love one another. And he defines that. He says, you will love one another as I have loved you. That is a sacrificing, self-giving, warm, and affectionate love that we have for people. It is a beautiful thing when the church does this. But can we be honest for just a second? It's also a really hard thing, isn't it? And that's because the church is made up of so many different kinds of people. The church has a lot of people with different backgrounds than you. Has a lot of people that you wouldn't naturally hang out with. Has a lot of people who, if we're just being honest, their personalities just rub you the wrong way. And you may have someone in your mind right now, that guy that just drives you up the wall every time you're around him. That girl that anytime she walks in the room, you just find yourself just rolling your eyes. Can't believe she's here, and drives you crazy. And also the church is made up of people who've wronged you, who've hurt you. So how, in the middle of a broken and fractured world, and if we're honest, what feels a lot of times like a broken, fractured church, how can we have this kind of reconciliation amongst us? We're going to be talking a little bit about that today, but let me just tell you, it starts with understanding this truth, that we already have that kind of reconciliation. That it's already happened, and then it happened in the same way that we got this kind of reconciliation. It happened through the cross of Jesus Christ. This is what the Apostle Paul says when he's writing to the Ephesians. He describes these two different people groups, the Jewish people and the Gentiles. And these are two people that could not be more opposed to each other. Two people that could not be more different and could not have more tension between them. There were so many different dividing lines and barriers between the Jews and the Gentiles. You have divisions of race, first of all, and you have a division of religion, and you have a division of social circles, and you have a division of culture. There were so many things that would pull these two different people groups apart. But Paul says, for those who are the Jewish group and those who are the Gentile group who put their faith in Jesus, all of those divisions lose their significance. Here's how he describes it in Ephesians chapter 2. He says, for Christ himself has brought peace to us. He united Jews and Gentiles into one people when in his own body on the cross, he broke down the wall of hostility that separated us. Together as one body, Christ reconciled both groups to God by means of his death on the cross, and our hostility toward each other was put to death. And if it can be true for them, it can be true for anybody. You see, what happens is when Jesus reconciled you to the Father, and he called you over and you came and sat down on that bench with God, you were not just coming to him, but you were coming to sit down with everyone else who's been called to come sit with God. When you were reconciled to God, you were reconciled to other brothers and sisters around you. So the question is not for me, will I be reconciled to my black brother or to my Asian sister? The question is not, will I be unified with the Christian who has a different political belief than me, or will I be one with the guy whose personality bugs me? No. That is already settled. If you are in Christ, regardless of your race or your background or your personality or your political persuasion, you and I are one, along with every other Christian in this room. So the question is not, will we be reconciled? The question is simply this: will we live that reality out? We'll see you tomorrow.